Right now, let's talk about what is going on in the world of progressives and wokes and all of those people, as we've seen these ongoing battles about, well, pretty much every single aspect of our lives, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's Extinction Rebellion, whether it's museums and libraries, re-examining and universities everything about their past and any links to the slave trade, whether it is whether or not the government can appoint a former Australian Prime Minister as a trade envoy. Yeah, former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott was accused of being a homophobe, of being a misogynist and, God forbid, a climate change denier, and therefore was unfit for the unpaid role of being a British trade envoy. That's what we were told by many senior figures in the politics and, the media as well last week. But the Prime Minister went ahead and did appoint Tony Abbott as one of those unpaid trade advisors, much to the chagrin of many of those critics. But let's talk about this as, is it finally a victory for common sense? The woke brigade not getting what they want? Let's talk to Brendan O'Neill. He's editor of Spite Online. Good morning to you.
Hi, Julia.
Good morning. We were discussing all this at the end of the last week. I spoke to Peter Credlin, who was former chief of staff to Tony Abbott, explaining why there was plenty of evidence that he was neither a misogynist nor a homophobe, not least from his lesbian sister, whose wedding he had actually attended to another woman. But I have to say, I left my show on Friday, thinking the government's going to give in. They're going to give in. They're going to be bound to this ridiculous pressure, these accusations, and they're not going to appoint him. And then I was pleasantly surprised to see that they did. Were you surprised they went ahead and appointed him?
I was surprised, and because this government has made quite a few U-turns recently, I was surprised and I was really pleased, because I think it's a very good example of holding the line. And if they had caved in and done a U-turn on this, it would have been disastrous for freedom of thought in this country, because the hysteria about Tony Abbott had nothing to do with whether he was good at trade talks, had nothing to do with whether he was good for that particular role that he's now being given. It was all about his inner moral convictions, things that he said about social issues and sexual issues, and the idea that you should be prevented from having a role in public life because of your views on matters like that. That would have been a step too far for this woke hysteria. So I'm really glad the government stood up to that.
I have to say, I'm very surprised that they did, because there has been there was a huge backlash. It was the front page of some national newspapers. And again, the thing is, and this is the same as when we've had accusations of racism, or in the Me Too era, when we had, any man who'd once said something that some woman didn't like or touched her arm was suddenly a sexual predator and likely rapist. That these accusations could be thrown out. And that's the end of the matter. If someone thinks you're a misogynist or a homophobe, regardless of the evidence for or against that is enough. And even when the evidence, there is evidence that someone does have some questionable views. Well, no, I shouldn't even say that, questionable views. They have views that may be different from yours or mine or anyone else who's complaining. There is still this idea that because those views aren't the so-called correct views, that means they must be expunged from polite society.
Yeah, and exactly, that's what they're actually saying. That's what these woke mobs are saying. If you don't have correct think, you can be expelled from polite society and you shouldn't get a job in public life. The elephant in the room, of course, is that Tony Abbott is a practicing Catholic, and he's a conservative Catholic, which means he has conservative Catholic views. So this was really iffy stuff, because what people were essentially saying is if you have traditional Catholic beliefs, you can't have a job on a trade board. And that was really dodgy. But, the thing that it really brings home to me is how real cancel culture is, because this was an attempt to cancel a former Prime Minister of Australia. We've seen, as you mentioned, Extinction Rebellion blockading newspapers, trying to block mass newspapers from getting to ordinary people. We've seen groups like Stop Funding Hate trying to prevent Co-op and other organisations from advertising in The Spectator or anywhere else because they've published articles critical of transgenderism. What we've seen over the past week, cancel culture is real. It's the left's most common tactic now, and it's a serious menace to freedom. Not just the government, everyone needs to stand up to this.
And this is the issue, isn't it? There's often people think, say in the case of Tony Abbott, he did say some stuff I don't agree with. No, I don't agree with a number of his views on issues, certainly on gay marriage. I completely disagree. But what's interesting is, of course, only about 10 years ago, most gay rights groups didn't agree with gay marriage. Also, he's accused of misogyny because he was asked, "What have you done for the women of Australia?" And he said, when the housewives of Australia are doing the ironing, declining, their energy costs have gone down because of me. And that's supposedly evidence that he hates women. I mean, the reality is 85% of housework in Australia, I've looked at recent polls, 85% of housework in Australia is still done by women. So that's a perfectly reasonable point to have made. And again, it may not have been how I would have chosen to phrase it, but I don't think someone should be cancelled because of it. But let's talk about Extinction Rebellion. You brought them up. We spoke a little bit earlier to an Extinction Rebellion protester who was at one of the printing plants that was closed down and delayed over the weekend. His defence of their actions is A, climate change is very, very important and we need to pay more attention. And B, nasty, horrible billionaires are in charge of the media in this country and therefore it's okay to do whatever we want to do. Are you convinced by either of those arguments?
Completely and utterly unconvinced. And what that was, the Extinction Rebellion blockading of the newspaper printing, that was just an effort to stop press freedom. It was archaic, medieval, censorious attack on the freedom of the press by a bunch of upper middle class eco-death cultists who think they have the right to tell the rest of us what we can read and what we can hear. And, the language they use, they use this very Orwellian language. They said, we're going to free the truth. So that they blockade the publication of newspapers in a democracy under the banner of free the truth. I mean, it is so incredibly Orwellian. But if you look at one of the flyers that Extinction Rebellion put out, basically they were saying, the newspapers pump people full of lies. They make us believe things we shouldn't believe. They really twist people's minds. This is just old-fashioned snobbery. The real target of their attack are ordinary people who they think are brainwashed by newspapers, brainwashed by billionaires. They can use this fancy anti-billionaire language, but their target is ordinary people because they think we're really thick.
And that's a point I put to this Extinction Rebellion protester, actually. To his credit, he has stood for election. I said, well, stand for election. He says he has. But again, we see what support that, the Green Party has. And there's a 2.9%, I think, at the last general election, which tells you the level of genuine support for this when it comes to the ballot box, as opposed to what someone says when they're asked by a pollster in the street. We can all go, I'm terribly concerned about the environment, and I'm going to go home and put my heating on and drive in my diesel car. Let's get to reality here. But it is absolutely fascinating that their main issue is that we're all too stupid. We're being led by the nose. Let's also talk about what's going on in our cultural institutions. Whether it is the British Library saying that we're all racist and Rule Britannia's racist, and last night of the proms causing a big row. What's been going on at the BBC? Universities basically saying that if a statue of someone who donated to the university got any money from the slave trade, it needs to be taken down. Now the latest is the Natural History Museum. They are examining their colonialist legacy of naturalists in the wake of Black Lives Matter protests, because they have been warned by some colleagues in the museum that they may find it problematic that they include specimens gathered by Charles Darwin, whose voyage to the Galapagos Islands on HMS Beagle was cited by a curator as one of Britain's many colonialist scientific expeditions. We are in... that sound is the collective sound of the entire population right now, which is that sort of... What is going on? Now, we know in the past the world was not a very nice place. We should celebrate. It's a much nicer place now. But Charles Darwin was living in a colonial time, and he was able to go and collect these wonderful samples and, give us this incredible theory of evolution, which has changed the whole way we view the world around us. But somehow there needs to be some editing because the past isn't very nice.
It's crazy. And, let's not beat around the bush. Charles Darwin is arguably the most important scientist in the history of science, or certainly he's right up there. As you say, through his theory of evolution, he transformed our understanding of the natural world and ourselves. I mean, this is a man who made such a significant contribution to human history. And now there is even talk about cancelling someone like him or questioning his presence or a statue of him or whatever else it might be. What this reveals, all these institutions attacking things from the past and taking down statues and now even questioning Charles Darwin, this is an attack on Western civilization. This is an attack not simply on all the bad people from history, of which there were many, but it's an attack on people from the Enlightenment, people who developed science. It's an attack on these wonderful museums, which are so central to how we understand understand the world. These people are reactionaries. They're attacking history, and we really need to put a stop to it.
We need to stop using the word progressive, don't we? Just finally, briefly, if you will, Brendan O'Neill, do you think with the evidence of, the fact that people are speaking out about this, the fact that people, the government was willing to stand up on Tony Abbott and people sort of just saying enough is enough, the attacks on J.K. Rowling and all of that, do you think there is now the silent majority backlash is going to come?
I hope so. And I think the vast majority of people out there watch this stuff and hear this stuff and either roll their eyes or moan about it over a pint. They're not into this at all. And what needs to happen now is the government needs to recognise that. Yeah. The government, I think, has been slow to react on some of this craziness. And if it recognises that ordinary people are sick and tired of this reactionary nonsense and the government takes a stand, it will become more popular. OK,
Brendan O'Neill, wise words there for Boris Johnson. Listen to these words. 9:18 is the time.